Okay, class. Chapter 2 is, looking at the fuel for the exercise. The title, Bioenergetics and Muscle Metabolism, is essentially, this chapter is on the three energy systems, the making of ATP, regenerating it as we use it for muscle contraction or metabolism or whatever other reasons we need energy. So keep in mind the big picture as we're working through this material here. A few basic definitions that we always have to think about. The word substrates is essentially the macronutrients of the carbohydrate, fat, and protein. Those, as you know, those macronutrients that we consume in larger amounts each day. We all understand that carbohydrate is the primary energy source, and fat and protein are secondary sources. The word bioenergetics is a kind of a fancy term for the process of converting these substrates into the ATP energy, and all of this is performed at the cellular level. And then the word metabolism is the summation of these chemical reactions that happen in the body, again for the purposes of making ATP from these substrates, and then using it for the purpose of muscle contraction and other physiological functions along the way. When thinking about the substrates that are used as fuel for exercise, again, the primary source is carbohydrate with increasing intensity, and fat and protein are really secondary sources. If you take a look at resting levels, this source, your book talks about a 50% carbohydrate and 50% fat blend of what you're using when you're sitting there at rest. I have read in other books where it says maybe 55% fat, 45% carbohydrate. Nevertheless, as you increase in intensity and you go for an exercise of shorter duration with more intensity, you use more carbohydrate. And when you go of something that is a longer duration, a lower intensity level, then you'll see more fat used. So you can think of it this way, that as you go from rest to exercising intensity, you will essentially go from burning a little bit more fat at rest and start shifting into burning more carbohydrate. And protein is essentially there all the time, maybe contributing approximately 1% or less of the energy that we're using. We don't get a major shift in this until we run out of carbohydrate for fuel. And when we run out of carbohydrate for fuel, then we have the remaining energy needs being met with our fat and our protein. A few facts about each of these macronutrients, beginning with carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is used in the body for energy in the form of either glucose or glycogen. Glycogen is stored in the liver and muscles. Most of it's stored in the muscles. But it is converted even to glucose before it's actually used. So glucose is that amount of blood sugar you have. It's called serum glucose. It's in the bloodstream. And experts tell us probably the average body size has about 2,500 kilocalories stored in the human body. And I think if you read your book, that's only for a person of about 130 to 140 pounds. The average body fat level of maybe 12 or 14% fat, which most people are probably a higher fat percentage than that. And it yields about 4 kilocalories per gram. Now we have a lot more fat stored in the human body, as you can see. Maybe I said 70,000 kilocalories, going back to that average person that's quoted in your textbook of maybe being a body size of 135, 140 pounds at 12 to 14% of body fatness. So most people are going to have more than 70,000 calories of energy to use from fat. You can see that it yields almost double what carbohydrates do at 9.4 kilocalories per gram. The issue with fat, though, is it's slow to break down. It requires an additional process of beta oxidation, and it breaks down the free fatty acids predominantly, and some glycerol, to be able to be used for energy. So it's not the most efficient energy in that sense, in the sense of that it does take a little more oxygen to actually oxidize them, but there is a lot of kilocalories per gram. It's just slower to process to do. And this table 2.1 pretty much sums up what we've already talked about in the last two slides, where you can see how muscle glycogen is the predominant amount of where glycogen is stored in the muscle. You have a little bit of glucose in body fluids, and this is grams right here in kilocalories in this column. And then you see fats. There's about 70,000+ calories of fats. There is a little bit of fat intramuscularly in the muscle, just as you might see in a piece of meat or a steak or something you would eat. You would see how these are kind of ingrained there. You actually have fat in your muscle. And again, you can see at the bottom of the slide that this is information that's based upon someone about 143 pounds, 12% body fat, and so most people are probably going to have different dimensions of this, and so it'll affect these total values. Finally, looking at protein, protein is an energy source, but it's a minimal energy source in provision. As you know, you've studied probably before that proteins largely used as building blocks for tissue, especially muscle tissue. There is a process where it can be converted into glucose and uses energy, the proteins, called gluconeogenesis. And you can also convert a little bit of protein into free fatty acids called lipogenesis, where they can actually each be used for energy. Protein makes its greatest contribution when we are pretty well low on carbohydrates and all we have left is fats and proteins. At that point, it kicks in and might provide 5 to 10%. I've read some particular sources where it said maybe up to 20%, possibly, but it's a minimal amount, and that's what it's provide most of its energy. So this figure 2.1 shows you the cellular metabolism, the results from the breakdown of the three different fuel substrates provided by the diet, the fats, the carbohydrates, and the proteins. And once each is converted to its usable form, it either circulates in the blood as an available pool to be used for metabolism, or it's actually just stored in the body itself.